step of this little journey as far as refinishing the cabinets is putting these little shelves on here. Well, I have one of these two shelves, but the other one needs to be replaced. So I'm looking around the shop, and I found a piece of birch plywood here, a little chunk of birch plywood, and it's too narrow this way. Well, they have to duplicate this guy. Well, the front would look better if it was a solid piece of birch. So what I'll do with this particular piece is I will extend this out another, whatever the difference is on that piece right there. So if this is If this is 8 5/8, this is 8 or 7 3/4, then I have to make up the difference with that piece of birch here. So I'll go ahead and get all this cut out and get it put together. I got to clean up the back here, pull the old staples out of here, clean up the glue. The other thing I have to do is clean up the glue in those dados there and make that ready to reglue. Refasten these little support pieces here. I have these little support pieces here that go underneath the shelves for support. So I'll have to pull the staples out of here. I'll keep those staples in place, and I will use whichever one of these looks like this one here used to go under this shelf. So I'll reinsert those staples here, and I'm going to go ahead and glue it. They didn't glue it before, really isn't necessary, but I'm going to go ahead and glue it anyway just to give it some extra security. But anyways, I'll run these staples out of here, clean up this edge, and then clean up that dado over there, and make this thing ready to take a stain. So the easiest way I've found to remove an old staple is just to take a pair of needle nose type vice grips, and sometimes you can just bend it back like this and it'll pull it right out. I love when a plan comes together when you're on camera. That should fit nicely on that new dado I clean out there. Now I need to duplicate this shelf. So now I'll take a width here, 8 5/8 by 22.5. I'll just clean up the edges of this piece of plywood so they're perfectly square. And I'll know what the difference that I'll need for the to make up the difference on that piece of birch lumber I have there. There's that edge. So this is nice and square and true. It's not chipped up or anything here on these edges. So what I'll do is I'll glue a extra piece of birch plywood on the front of this, and this is going to be the outside that you're going to see when I get done putting the birch plywood on there. So in order to find out how long of a piece of birch plywood I need to cut off, is what I'll do is I'll set this on. I'll use the old shelf as a template, where it's nice and square on the back side. I'll place a piece of birch plywood here on the front of this. I have to clean up this edge here and make it nice and square and flat all the way across there, so I can glue it to the front face of the plywood here. So I want to figure out how long to make this piece of wood, and that'll be plenty long right in there someplace. And we'll take that over to the miter saw, roughly in there somewhere, and now I'll run this edge through the joiner. Okay, that's all nice and clean and straight. Now I have that where I'm going to be laminating this together to the plywood. First I have to make this the same dimension as the 3/4 inch 3/4 inch plywood. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly just throw a little line around this, just to kind of know where I'm going to be. Now all I have to do is I need to cut this width here on the table saw and set this piece of board here aside. Now I'm going to take this over to the planer and plane it down the same width as my plywood. Okay, I'll go ahead and put them in the bar clamps. So tomorrow I should be able to come in here and all the glue here will be dry on this edge here. So for that new shelf that I'm having glued up in there in the dry room, I also have to make a shelf support for that. So what I'm doing here is I am tracing out an existing support. And as you can see, there's going to be just a little bit of a gap in here. Well, I'm going to go ahead and cut this out and see what it looks like. You know what, that's not going to be too hard to go ahead and just add this on here. I'll glue that up with the shelf support there, and just go ahead and fill that in like the other ones with this other extra piece of wood that I cut off of the corner. So I'll just cut these corners here out on the bandsaw, and then I'll go ahead and glue this piece on here and just let that set overnight. Then I'll take it out of the clamps, sand it down, and it'll be just right. Alright, my shelf should be dry by now. It's the next day, and the shelf support should be dry. So I got to cut this out on the bandsaw, finish this out on the miter saw. shelving unit, or the base unit, and determine how deep the dado joint was on that end part for the cabinet. And so I scribed a little mark here where the dado joint runs along the shelf unit here. So the shelf support has to come up within whatever that length is. So this part here can go into the dado joint on the cabinet base itself. Now what I'll do is I'll go ahead and mount this on here, glue it in place, and then when this dries, then I can mount it to the cabinet base itself. And we can I squared up the shelf support on the back side. I centered it inside of the support block, centered it to the center of the shelf. That's the center of the shelf right there. And so obviously this is vertical. This is inset roughly 1/8 of an inch to accommodate the dado on the shelf, or on the cabinet base. So that has to go in just a little bit, and then I have this squared to the shelf itself. And so I just have that setting on there. If I could put a little bit of weight on there, or put a clamp on there, that would be good.